Hello, friends. Welcome to a little mini series I'm going to call Let's Make a Quilt. And specifically, we're going to make Cosmic Feathers, which is a quilt by Taralee Quiltery. So while I iron, I want to give you all some time to look at all the gorgeous fabric. So I'm going to just talk to y'all a little bit about I guess like how this quilt came to be. So Tara is an absolutely incredible human. I met her like through Instagram, and I started testing for her, and then we got to meet at QuiltCon, and everything that you see and hear, like she is somehow even more amazing in person. I absolutely loved getting to hang out with her, walk the show floor at QuiltCon. We got to see Blurred Vision, which was her quilt that hung at QuiltCon that actually inspired Cosmic Feathers, and just chef's kiss. Absolutely incredible. So she put out the call to her testers saying, hey, who wants to make Cosmic Feathers? I said, yes, me, I do. Send me fabric. So she actually created this bundle to send to me, and I love it. It's so pretty. So you see these little numbers. She pre-numbered everything for me. I'm going to talk a little bit later about why that is handy and important, but right now, just gorgeous fabric. So yeah, really quickly, in this series I'm going to be talking about how long everything takes in the process for me. I realize that we all are different. We all have different styles. We all do things differently. Me personally, I don't like using pins. You're going to see pins in one video where I thought about it for half a second. I was like, is it worth it? No, it was not for me, and that's okay. If it is for you, I love that for you. You've got to do it the way that you like to do it. This is just a snapshot of me saying, hey, this is how I made my quilt, and this is how it came out, and I love it. All of it. It's amazing. So I hope that you all enjoy. This section of ironing out my fabric took 14 minutes and 48 seconds. I'm going to round up. I hope that you forgive me. We're going to call this 15 minutes to iron fabric. So 15 minutes into this quilt so far. All right, it is time to start cutting my fabric. So I've ironed it, I folded it, and now I'm going to be cutting it into strips. Real quick call out, yes, I'm going to be changing my blade. It's not cutting through the fabric like I want it to, so I will change it, don't worry. Now, when I go to start cutting my fabric, I use my stripology ruler. I love it. It works for me. It's fantastic. So I always square it up to make sure that I'm getting that like sharp edge, that straight edge. So I took some of those strips and I just cut a little bit off of them, and I included them on this color sheet. Tara always includes this tone page in her patterns, which is so helpful to me because I can look at this like right now and I'm like, okay, number 1 is black, number 2 is the white fabric. But then I get to number 4 and I'm like, oh no, is number 4 the teal or the other teal? So having that sheet really, really helps. Just a little bit of fabric, a little bit of tape, and it just makes the whole process so good. She also, in the last video you saw, she numbered the fabrics for me, so I didn't have any guessing work, and it was just brilliant. So I cut my strips, I sewed them together. Now, when you are making a new quilt, a lot of people will recommend that you make a test block. I'm at the point in my quilting journey to where I don't do that, and I just go for it, and whatever happens, happens, and it was okay here. So this is something that I would potentially recommend you making a test block. I ended up wanting to just kind of like make a test block with the fabric as I was cutting it. So as I was cutting it, I was like, is this coming out correctly? Am I doing everything right? I measured it up against the template that Tara includes with the pattern. This pattern has a lot of templates. And I was able to be like, okay, this is good. One of them came out a little wonky, 100% me, because it didn't happen again. But what I love so much about having these templates is it shows you these little notches to cut out. So you see me doing that. I feel like this is one of those things where you're like, oh my gosh, this is such an annoying step. I don't want to do it. Trust me, do it, because it's going to make things line up to where you don't need to pin them. I think you're going to see here in a little bit, I brought some pins out and I was like, should I pin this? And I was like, no, I don't want to pin this. I just want to do it. So I didn't pin anything on this quilt despite seeing a couple pins. I promise, Scout's honor. So I'm going through and just making this block out of this first set just to kind of like see, is it working the way that I expect it to work? The pattern is beautiful. They're like the diagrams to make sure that you're doing everything correctly. I was second guessing, like, oh my goodness, this looks weird to sew. It's correct. Just trust the process, they say, right? Trust the process. So that's what I'm doing here. A bit of finger pressing in between, and then I hit it with the iron kind of at the end. That's how I like to do it. And so I'm just going through making these first 6 diamonds. And then after that, I'm going to do everything else all at once, and you'll see that in one video. But what I really like to do with this is just do a little bit, make sure I know what I'm doing, and then do that lather, rinse, repeat process where I can just go through and get everything done as quickly as possible. So you'll notice that I am pressing all of these blocks open. It's what she recommends in the pattern, and I agree. I think it's a good idea here as well. It's going to help them to lay as flat as possible. And since you're working on the bias, this is going to be a good thing to do. When you're working on the bias, it causes the fabric to possibly have some stretch. Depending on how, you might be used to making your quilts, you might have never really worked on the bias or never noticed it. Some people talk about having bias binding, and that's when you're able to, like, if you're making like a circle quilt, you would 100% use bias binding because it will curve around the curves of the circle ever so easily. So what's really nice about this is press it open. Just be careful when you're working on the bias. Don't get too swishy with it. But to make this part of the quilt, these 6 blocks and cut all of my fabric strips for it took 2 hours and 6 minutes. So all in all, this part, I am now 2 hours and 21 minutes into the process of making this quilt. Okay, so now I am going through and I am just going to iron together all of my strips. This is where having that sheet with the with the fabric swatches is so helpful, because again, I'm able to look at it and say, okay, the black one is tone 1, the white one is tone 2. But then as you can see, some of these other colors, I could easily get confused just by like having this memory. So having the tone sheet is so helpful. When I was finished sewing the strips, I just kind of threw them on the back of my chair, and then again I finger press them first. I'm not doing that iron until the very end, but to iron together all of these different strip sets, it took me about 65 minutes. So we are now 3 hours and 26 minutes into the making of this quilt. So now it is time to give it the heat with the iron, that final press before starting to cut. And you can kind of see why I like to do things in batches, because I can just kind of like sew everything all at once and not have to, move around too much and not have to flip my iron and just all these little things, and I can kind of play around and get in the zone and be like, this is what is going to work, this is how I can get through this. You might have seen me, I was like, should I use my stripology ruler, can I do that? And I was like, nope, I'm much better like this. So I was able to go through and like, you see the selvage, but you might have noticed in the previous video I cut off the selvage. I didn't actually need to do that, and that was one of those things that I learned in the process, what works for me. Another quick call out that I want to make here is, you notice that I stopped moving my fabric because it was on the bias. Something that I found was that it was better for me to move myself and my ruler rather than moving my fabric. It just kept those pieces a little more secure. So if you have the space, 100%, that's what I'm going to recommend you do too. Last call out. The template is included with this pattern. There are a lot of templates, I said that. But what I found is I actually have a separate ruler that kind of acts as the trimmer for the bevel that I needed for this. So this is one of those things. Try out what you got. Try out what works for you. And then when you just get in that zone, you can just be in that zone and just kind of get everything like efficiently and properly. You don't have to think about, oh, how did I do this? What did I do here? No, just get it done. So just cutting all my strips, cutting again all those little bevels. It takes a lot of time. It absolutely does, but it is so worth it. And this is how you can get away with not using pins, because it's just going to match up and it'll tell you, and you don't have to guess what's a 1/4 inch. Are all of my points perfect? No. Did I use pins? Also no. That's the choice that I made. You've got to do what works for you. Ironing and cutting and all of this little piece took exactly 1 hour. So now we are 4 hours and 26 minutes into making this quilt. All right, so now I am going to sew together my diamonds, or my strips to make my diamonds. And I'm going to be changing the angle here in just a moment, because I guess I wanted you to see how I have my desk set out. I just kind of have all of my diamonds in a row. But then I wanted you to see how cool these bevels work together. So you just line one up on one end, and then you make sure that it lines up properly on the other end. And then when you just go to sew your 1/4 inch, it's going to just like come together in the correct place. So here I kind of slowed this bit of the process down so you could see it. So I have my 2 strips. I'm just going to flip it over. Another interesting thing here, I mentioned this, my brain was like, this is wrong because there's so much overhang. I promise you it's right, but just it might take a moment. I think I had one where I had to redo it because I sewed it on the wrong way, because I was like, nope, this is just so wrong. But just kind of trust it. It'll be good. So I sewed the 2 strips together, finger pressed, brought the 2 then together to have it be the 4 total. And again, here you see all part of like this batch processing. I love it. I'm always going to be doing it whenever I can. That's why like repetitive block quilts I love and I can get through really quickly, because I just get in that like, I don't know, like repetitive like finger memory movement. So I'm able to do that. So sewing the diamonds together, 57 minutes, 5 hours, 23 minutes. And then the best part when it comes to like batch ironing, I get in this little routine where it's like, I'm going to iron it. I'm like going to finger press it. I'm going to iron it. I'm going to flip it. I'm going to iron it. I'm going to leave my iron on it. I'm going to prep my other one. I'm going to grab my clapper. And then I'm going to put my clapper on, and I'm going to start the next one. And I just kind of like go back and forth, and you see this rhythm. And it's really nice. I like it a lot. So ironing the diamonds, 17 minutes, 5 hours and 40 minutes into the making of this quilt. All right, so then for this last part, I went through and I just kind of followed the pattern, and I tried to lay all my blocks out so I could see what it was going to look like. I have a couple other things on my design wall. No worries about that. But I was just going through and kind of trying to figure out, how does this quilt come together? What is it going to look like when it's all together? And this is where you can have some fun and play with the layout. I went through and I did it as it's written in the pattern first, and I looked at it and I loved it. And I was like, obviously this is perfect. It's so good. And then I was like, but what if I switch it around? And this is where it's really kind of fun and cool, because there's so many different ways that you could move this around and adjust it. I was like, what if I just flipped every other one? And I looked at it and I was like, that's kind of cool. And I kept going and I was like, yeah, I think this is how I'm going to do it. It just was different. And, you know, if I make this quilt again, will I do it the same way? Will I do it differently? I don't know. But it was really fun to just kind of play around and figure out how it was going to look in the end. This time was just 5 minutes playing with the layout. So 5 hours, 45 minutes into the making of this quilt.